Hello, welcome to the Bluff Books podcast. This is hashtag Bluff Books, the show that's all about building, leading, and understanding financial freedom. So whether you're an average Joe seeking financial well-being and independence, or a fiduciary advisor who seeks to connect with average Joe, thank you for joining me on this show as we discuss books relating to the topic of financial literacy. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can continue to enjoy a new episode with me every week. I'm your host, Ian Gates, a former Spanish teacher and U.S. Army intelligence officer, but now I'm an aspiring financial advisor because as a teacher and an intel officer, my soldiers and my students constantly had financial questions, and when they'd ask me, I'd have to say, I don't know, I have to look that up too. And so the show's name comes from the military acronym BLUF, which stands for Bottom Line Up Front. It means that here I seek to always present the most important information right at the start in the clearest, most engaging way possible. Like my hero LeVar Burton of Reading Rainbow fame, my goal is to encourage a love of reading, and for this show to be a springboard, not a stopping point for your engagement with these texts. And please remember, this is a radio show, so we can only discuss concepts in terms of general truths and tendencies. It is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Thank you, and let's start the show. Hello, welcome to the fourth episode of the Bluff Books podcast. I'm here with Chad Holmes, CFP, and today we're going to talk about his new book, The Inheritance Playbook, which just came out on Amazon. Thank you, Chad, for coming to the show.
Ian, appreciate you having me. Really excited to talk today.
There's so many books out there that discuss financial topics and do it in a very sterile, clinical way, but I really appreciated the wit you put into this topic and your efforts to help get people really thinking about how do we help mom and dad before they are too old to help themselves or are having us take care of their legacy.
Yeah, it was a fun book to write because the topic is one I'm familiar with. My parents are in their 60s and they are helping their parents. So I've been watching it in live action for years now, and I've been blessed that both generations above me have wanted to include me on the financial planning and managing the assets and tax planning and all this stuff. And what we've done is realize that this isn't something that you've been able to Google up until now. I mean, it's not like, hey, what should I be doing? And then there's just a simple list, because it's such a vast universe of tax plays and individual scenarios that's very difficult to capture that in a simple list of things to do. So what I tried to do was say the default suggestion is everybody just get yourself a trust. Put everything in a trust, and that helps. And I do think that a trust is a great answer, but I know that a lot of people, for some reason, are scared of trust. Either they feel like trusts are only for rich people, or trusts have their own tax rate. They're weird, and how can I get my money? And I have to have somebody approve things and all this stuff. So what I wanted to do was come up with other ideas, namely free ideas that people can do of any size wealth, where they can minimize taxes and stress and probate and maximize their parents' legacy, maximize their inheritance. And in doing so, let the loving gift that mom and dad have left behind last for longer.
Yes, indeed. I have seen my parents' grandparents pass away and the process of getting everything set up, and my parents' parents are starting to prepare to move on from this world. A few of them already have. And what I've seen is that really encouraging them to get things set up before they're no longer able to make decisions is just incredibly important. I remember talking to my uncle about, he got after my grandfather about 9 months before he passed, saying, you really need to update your will. And I know you've got some assets, like a lot of company stock, because he was a Lockheed man for 40 years. Dad, best thing you can do right now, even though you don't feel like it, is sit down with the lawyers. And that made the end, while difficult, no more difficult than it strictly had to be.
Sure, losing a loved one is awful. Let's not make it worse with unnecessary taxes and, frankly, chores is what probate becomes. It's a very long to-do list for the executor or executrix, whoever it may be, that's handling the estate of the deceased. And it is so much work. And if you just do a fraction of that work ahead of time, you save yourself hours of work. And tens of thousands of dollars potentially, depending on the size of the estate. And not just in fees and taxes, but just in unnecessary waste or inefficient tax bracket maneuvering. So there's just a lot can be done up front. Once the person has passed, you're just kind of playing defense and reacting, and there's no proactive ways to manipulate the situation at that time.
Yes, and I remember having a conversation with another brother. I'm one of 5 sons and a daughter.
Oh.
But he was saying, oh yeah, I'm young. I don't need a will, man. You heard of this thing called probate?
Right.
And yeah, it's not just going to automatically go to your wife. Some things will, but you can't assume that's the default if you don't do a little bit of legwork beforehand.
Especially if the parents disagree with the wife or the siblings disagree and there's no will in place, then we have to let a judge determine what happens to our assets when we're gone. And it's not just the known assets. What part of the book discusses is the unknown assets. Where are all your bank accounts? Where are all your life insurance or other sorts of policies? Do you have cash hidden in a mattress or a jacket or a closet or safe deposit box? All sorts of things. Let's leave a map for our loved ones. And if we don't do it now, they're going to have to do it on their own without knowing passwords and being authenticated and all that stuff, which makes it exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, and also the out-of-pocket costs, because someone's going to have to pay for the funeral or at the very least the cremation expense. And if your estate is tied up in probate, then that becomes a difficult situation. And as you pointed out in the book, you might be forcing your children to do something like take IRA penalties in order to have the liquid capital in order to lay mom to rest in something better than Tupperware.
Right. The estate could very well be and is often tied up for months, sometimes years, if there's a complex family situation, which is very common. And so somebody has to come out of pocket on that. You're exactly right. And it's, again, comes back to proactive planning. In fact, I had a few titles of the book before I landed on the inheritance playbook. For a while, I liked proactive inheritance. And my wife said, I don't know what that means. Don't do that. And then I wanted tax efficient inheritance. My wife said, I don't know what that means. Don't do that. And then I went to before they're gone. I really thought that would appeal to a bigger audience, but it didn't grab the exact attention I wanted. And so finally we landed on the inheritance playbook. And that seems to resonate with tax and finance nerds like myself, but also with people that have no interest or have never had an interest in financial planning, like, people like my wife who said, hey, that's not my world. I'm always brilliant. She does her own thing, and I don't do anything in her world either. So there's no overlap. But having her input really helped me address this book to a mass audience. I try not to get into the tax weeds or too deep into details. I try to use light stories, and I incorporate humor, sarcasm, and dry sense of humor in mine throughout, as you've commented on, that I hope makes it a good and easy read that someone can knock out in a weekend, feel like, hey, I now have the questions that I need to take forth to my family or to our estate attorney or to whoever it may be, so that we know we're doing the right thing now. And that's just one thing that's off my plate because I know we're doing the right thing now.
Definitely. And I got a kick out of your Sassy St. Peter videos. And so often people get advice from friends at church or their brother-in-law, and sometimes it was brilliant advice for the initial person, but I would compare it to taking your buddy's prescription. It may be just right for your buddy, but Lord knows what it's going to do to you.
Well said. That's exactly right. A lot of the stories or parables that are throughout this book talk about how a family member, they heard this from a nursing home resident or friends at church or whatever. And just like you said, it may have been perfect for them, but scenarios involving multi-generations of income tax brackets and things and net worth and longevity, it's just such an individualized process that this book is specifically not advice. It is, hey, here's things that could happen, or you could have it in this other much better situation. Here's some questions you can ask and make sure you're getting on the right path to make sure these very common pitfalls don't happen to you. Let's get ahead of the problem, be proactive, and think about financial planning, not just from me and my income, but for my generation above me and below me. And in doing so, by broadening that lens, we're able to kind of go against some common ideas in financial planning, such as a lot of times people say, yeah, lower your taxes, lower your taxes. Yeah, that's great. But if your taxes are super low and you're in your 80s, well, what if you advanced some IRA distributions, paid more in taxes instead of paying average rate of 10%? What if you paid an average rate of 12 or 14 or 15%? Because the people that inherit this money and pay ordinary income tax on it, they're in the 32% tax bracket. So yes, it can absolutely make more sense to pay more taxes now if, from a multi-generational perspective, we are lowering taxes. And a lot of financial planning software out there right now only looks at the individual client, doesn't look at above or below. And that makes sense because that's the person who's paying the advisor, right? So normally the advisor is focused on that client and their money and their income tax. But I really think the industry needs to step back and start thinking about the whole family and incorporating generations into the conversation and into the long-term ideas that we're seeking to maximize the family's wealth over time.
Yes, and in the United States, we're a very individualistic culture.
Mm-hmm.
I remember studying abroad in Spain and discovering that 25, 28, there's no stigma against living with mom until you get married.
Right.
And some of that's economics, but also it just comes down to the norms. And that was a bit of an eye-opening thing to me. And in other cultures, people live in multi-generational homes as a default.
Absolutely. And money here in the United States is so taboo. We don't talk about how much we make with anybody. It's very private information. And I certainly understand why people would want it to be private, but there can be extreme advantages to sharing that so that long-term planning can be done with multi-generational focus, particularly if there's a mediator in between the generations that says, okay, I don't want to say this generation is penalized. I need you to pay more taxes so that they pay less. But hey, let's think about it. How can we maximize it for everyone? This side of the Rubik's Cube has to be turned a little bit, which it messes up that, but we're getting to the right spot of where we need to be for optimization.
Yes, and so often what I see in your book is you present a scenario where people are trying their best to address the situation, be proactive, and set things up right. And often what they do is better than nothing, but they still take a $50, $60, $100,000 punch to the face because they forgot about something like step up in basis.
Yes. A lot of these stories I share are not made up. These are things that clients in the past have come to me with, hey, how do I undo this? Or, hey, here's what happened. Let's move on. And I ask a few questions and we realize, oh man, we really missed out on an opportunity. Some things cannot be undone. But I think in today, going back to our culture, the blanket advice that you get on the internet from people that went to a seminar and believe that they're now an expert in whatever topic these days, the blanket advice just doesn't work. It's so dangerous. And also reading the headline of an idea can be dangerous because, you didn't realize that there's an exception to that rule. And there's also an exception to that exception and so on and so forth. And there's just so many nuances. I think the tax code is 70 something thousand pages, maybe. I mean, just ridiculous. And there's no way anybody can claim that they know the entire thing. So getting a specialist who focuses on these specific problems can find the loopholes that work for your family and not for everyone's family, because there is no loophole that works for everyone's family. That's not a loophole. That's just default.
Yeah, the most expensive advice comes from amateurs oftentimes. And so often it's penny wise, pound foolish in that people are afraid of spending the money now, not realizing that they'll be very glad they did, if for no other reason than saving themselves a lot of heartburn and doubt as to whether they've set things up right.
Absolutely. There are times when it makes sense to spend money up front in the hopes that, hey, maybe some hypothetical future date, I can get the money back and some, and that's great and all. But this book really focuses on what are free things we can do now, and let's guarantee not some hypothetical date, but guaranteed inevitable situation is going to happen. You will have to go through probate with someone in your life, or someone in your family is going to have to, that as a family, this stuff is going to be resolved with or without your input. And if no one knows what they're talking about, then the default is the government gets more money. And guess what? They like it that way. The government has not put out this manifesto of ideas to help you stop paying taxes from either estate or income or capital gains and or penalties, whatever. I'm trying to put that together because there hasn't been a compilation like this out there. I was Googling it. We're dealing with my grandparents, and I've been trying to find a resource out there that really breaks down situations for, okay, what can we be doing now proactively? And we come across several ideas and things and, research and research and research. Okay, yes. Now we know this idea works for our specific situation. And probably every idea in the book my family's done. Can't think of an exception right now, but we took things that we did as a multi-generation perspective for financial planning. I broke it down into stories of made-up characters and, I exaggerated some situations, but to get the point across or to make the numbers more round, easy to follow. But in all these situations, we've followed this advice and have hopefully put a stop to the unnecessary stress of probate, unnecessary taxes and fees. I lost one grandfather while the book was being written, and I got to see some of this play out. It was a great reminder that there's still a great need out there for information like this, delivered in a manner that is digestible to all levels of education.
Yeah, the great and terrifying thing of when you discover that if not me, then who?
Yeah.
For an existing problem. And I found it interesting as well. I mean, I appointed an executor for my estate, and just going through those documents, realizing how involved it is. I had a Army deployment coming up, and I had to get all my documents ready to go, all my powers of attorney and such. And I remember being kind of panicked of like, oh man, there is so much to do and so little time. And if I don't make it back, what a mess that is going to be when it doesn't need to be that way. And in the book as well, I was really interested to see more details on just what a big job being an executor or executrix is. Having to get letters certifying you've been appointed, provide an accounting to the court, and the question of whether or not you even accept payment for doing it.
Yeah, Ian, first of all, thank you for your service. And then follow that. The book has a bunch of solutions, but the problem with writing a book like this is people don't know that there's a problem. They've just always been doing the default, like, oh, lost a parent, settle the estate, pay the taxes, yada, yada, and move on. And people aren't actively Googling, should I be doing something proactively? Because it hasn't really been a subject out there yet. So to your point in the introduction, I flat out say, hey, I've got a bunch of solutions for you, but in case you're not convinced that you even have a problem, let me walk you through what probate is. And then I go through the details in the introduction of the book of here's everything the executor has to do. And that's if there is a will. And so go through the complications and the timeline and the expenses and all this stuff. And then say, hey, what if we could avoid all of this? And then you just go through the 10 different chapters of totally separate ideas and unique solutions and explanations and examples and warnings. I say, hey, and also don't forget about this little nugget here, that counteractive or potential landmine here going through this planning idea. But yeah, knowing that there is a problem, understanding the costs and burden and timeline of probate is step one. So I'm glad you recognize that, yeah, this is not an easy thing for a loved one to do after just losing someone they love dearly.
Definitely. Having things set up in advance is one of the most loving things you can do as a patriarch or matriarch of your family, not make it more difficult than it needs to be. And one of the interesting things, too, reading the book was thinking about, okay, that interface between estate attorney, accountant, and certified financial planner, because usually you can't wear more than two hats. There's just way too much school to fit in one person's head.
Yep.
How have you navigated that in your work?
I have got a lot of letters behind my name. I've done a lot of schooling. I am not an estate attorney, but it's something that I read about and follow experts. And so although I am a CPA, I recognize that I am not a tax expert, because to be a CPA and call yourself a tax expert, you have to be doing taxes every day. It's just constantly changing, and I stay up to date with continuing education, but financial planning is my world, and I'm strong with taxes, and I'm somewhat strong with estate stuff. The nuances there get way out of my realm. But what I like to do, I charge people a flat fee. So there's no extra hours for me to communicate with your lawyer or your CPA. It's all just tucked in all together. And I work really well with CPAs because I speak their language. And with estate attorneys, I've got several close friends that are estate attorneys. And so I bounce ideas off them and get comfortable with the conversation before going and speaking with clients' estate attorneys. I've got questions to ask, make sure everybody understands why I'm asking it, what the purpose is, and where we're going with that idea. And in doing so, working together as a team with the client and their CPA and their estate attorney, which, as you said, is a necessary evil that we have to take care of, because doing so without the experts can be extremely costly.
Thank you very much, Chad, for coming on the show, and I'm excited to see your book out in the world, and I hope that many more great titles will come from your desk in the future.
Appreciate it, Ian.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Bluff Books podcast. We look forward to you joining us again as we continue to explore the world of finance, investing, and wealth building by reading new and classic books pertaining to financial literacy. And please remember, this is a radio show, so it's for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. But if you need financial advice that is relevant to your unique personal situation, please consider hiring a certified financial planner who works on a fee-only basis. The big ideas I cite here from the books are based on my interpretation of the text, and I look forward to hearing from you and engaging with you on your thoughts and recommendations. You can best reach me by joining the #BluffBooks group on LinkedIn or emailing me at ian.gates12@outlook.com. And remember, here at #BluffBooks, we cite sources, keep it brief, treat others with respect, use humor, promote freedom, and of course, don't bury the lead. Take care, guys.